Welcome back, everyone, to So Here's the Deal, our video series exploring my vast repertoire of recorded media and other media that I am sharing with my friends and the universe. With me for the David Lynch Film Fest's latest installment is my co-host and collaborator, McJulie. Hello, McJulie.
Hello.
And why are we here today?
We are here to talk about Dune, the David Lynch 1984 troubled masterpiece.
Troubled masterpiece indeed. Boy, I have so much to talk about with this movie. So I've mentioned this before, but I have seen this movie dozens of times, and I absolutely love it. I cannot talk enough about it. And troubled is a good adjective to use because it's a piece of work. I've there's interviews that I wanted to play tonight, but the video isn't probably going to work right for Julie to see the video, so I'm just going to skip them. But Lynch shot about 4 hours of film. He wanted to make a 6-hour film, and he wanted to go back and do more shoots to get the movie together and to make something that worked really well. Because in the interview that I saw, he was approached by Dino De Laurentiis, the producer of the film, who had the option on it from Universal Pictures, to do it. And Lynch had never read the book. In fact, he misheard De Laurentiis when De Laurentiis was talking and thought he said June and not Dune. And so he was looking around for a book called June and couldn't find it. Then figured out it was called Dune, got the book, read the book, and said, "Oh, I love that book. Yeah, I know what to do now." And so he went away, he wrote a script, and he came back, and De Laurentiis said, "Oh yeah, that'd be great. We should do that." And further in interviews that I saw with Frank Herbert was so excited about Lynch's script because it hewed so exactly to the text of the book that he thought that he would never see a more accurate representation of his work on screen. Now, obviously, for those who have read the book Dune, the movie takes some liberties all the way up through there. And that's because they had to keep cutting it back and cutting it back and cutting it back to get it down to the runtime that it ended up at. Lynch had to throw away a bunch of plot and also a bunch of interstitial cuts where people were explaining things that were going on that was covered handily in the text but is boring as shit to watch on screen. And so when people talk about the director's cut of David Lynch's Dune, which is the extended TV version that Universal put together without his knowledge, and it was so distressing that they had taken unfinished scenes, coupled them with an unapproved voiceover and animatic storyboards. Lynch demanded his name be taken off the film. And so when you see the extended cut of Dune out there, and I have it, I've seen it a bunch of times, it says a film by Alan Smithee. And Alan Smithee is the sobriquet you use when a director does not want to be associated with the film anymore. But David Lynch also wrote the movie, so they had to put in a fake writer's name as well for the extended cut because it would be David Lynch again. And he says, "No, I didn't write that. The way you cut that together is not the film I wanted to make. That's not what we should be doing, is doing that film." So I remember going to see this in the theater. I had read Dune. In fact, I had read Dune and the follow-up book, Dune Messiah, which was split into Children of Dune and Dune Messiah by Doubleday Books. I have read those, and I love those books. I went to see Dune with my mother, who was a big science fiction fan. In fact, she had a second printing copy of Dune, which I had read over and over again. So I didn't read the big the brown covered one. I had a blue covered one that I had read. It was from the 60s that she had read. So you've seen this before, right?
Oh, Sorry, I've seen what before? I
You
mean, Dune,
you've
obviously,
seen
but
Dune before, yes?
oh yes, yes. No, I watched it. I watched it when it was new in the theater in 1984. I went with my family. We kind of went to see all of the science fiction blockbusters as a family. Um, I don't remember any of them expressing any really strong opinions one way or the other. I think when I saw it, I already knew that the critical consensus was somewhat negative. Um, I don't remember the theater being completely full or suspiciously empty. It seemed about average, like on par with a Star Trek um
Yeah.
movie. So so yeah, it I saw the movie, and at some point I read some of the negative reviews, and I also read Harlan Ellison's um standout positive review. I think it
Glowing
was
praise, I might add.
yeah,
He
yeah.
loved it.
Yes, he loved it. And it's I should have reread it in anticipation of this, because I remember at the time thinking, yeah, yeah, that's the movie I saw, but I don't remember a lot of specifics. I just remember that he thought it was aces.
Yeah, in the interview I saw, as part of it was actually part of a 38-minute documentary about the making of Dune and things that was on the Spice Cyber edit, which we'll cover a little later. Harlan Ellison's interview appears on there, and he says this was an unfilmable book, an unwritable script, and an unwatchable movie, and all of those things combined to be great entertainment. And he couldn't believe what he was seeing on screen, and it made him really want to have his own work adapted in ways that were different than the Terminator or the the Outer Limits episodes and Star Trek episodes that he'd done. So Herbert loved it, Harlan Ellison loved it, science fiction writers, science fiction fans loved it, critics hated it because it was disjointed mess and it got cut up, and Lynch wasn't all that happy with it either. But when people talk about a director's cut of Dune, Lynch is always telling people the one that's in the theater is the director's cut because I'm the director and I cut it. It just happens that I had to cut more than I wanted to.
And that really does show, I think. When I watched it most recently, I was really struck by how certain fairly major plot turns just get very glossed over with
Yeah.
people, okay, it's 2 years later.
They Scooby-Dooed it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a. So I watched the Spice Saver edit, which I'll go into now. So I was talking about the unauthorized TV cut, the extended cut, and the scenes were put in out of order. The Virginia Madsen narration was gone, and do you imagine intro? She played Princess Irulan in the movie, and she opens the movie, and she opens the trailer, which we'll watch in a bit. But that was gone. It was replaced by a good 8 minutes of a cartoon, effectively, where they explain the whole plot and backstory of Dune to you, and then they make you watch the Lynch film's things, telling you the things that the animatic told you because they thought that it wasn't explained properly for television and people wouldn't understand it. In the theater, I don't know if you got this when you went to see it, but they handed out a little brochure that said, "This is what Dune is," and it explained the concepts of Dune and what ornithopter means or what Fremen means and Koem means, and these are all things that were explained in the film as Lynch wrote it, but they were parts that were removed for the theatrical release.
I did not get an explainer, but I remember reading that they existed.
Yeah. I mean, I
And
lost it. It was 40 years ago. I don't.
yeah, the thing that strikes me as really odd about that, because I remember the negative critical consensus being very much, the movie's, incomprehensible. Who knows what, how can we tell what's happening? Um, because when I watched it last night, my feeling was this is a perfectly ordinarily comprehensible movie. And it just made me wonder, like 40 years ago, were critics just not familiar with science fiction, so that the mere fact that it was science fiction struck them as, a mind trip?
Yeah, yeah, it could well be.
I mean, I honestly, comparing it to the more recent Villeneuve Dunes, uh, two movies, so it's a more appropriate length for the
Hmm.
story. You know, it's not actually that different from the David Lynch film in
It's
terms of its
not.
structure.
It's not. And
Um,
what I mentioned earlier, right, is because they're all hewing very closely to the the book. That 6 hour length really works for a lot of reasons because it's a book that's this thick, and Lynch had to make a this thick book. 1 minute of action on screen is 1 page of script. That's the rule. And so when you get a movie that comes in at what 158, that's what it is. Dune. Let me look it up here real fast. What is the runtime? 137 minutes. So 137 minutes is 140, 150 page script, right? And script pages are expanded and large and double sided. Text pages aren't. They're shorter. So we're really talking about a third of the book gets adapted when you make it into a script, and so that third of a book has to do a lot of work to get the sense of the story that the author had meant and that the screenwriter had meant. And a lot of that comes in visuals and audio cues that work all the way through. So this Spice Cipher edit that people figure out, which I do recommend that you go back and watch. It's on the server.
okay.
Uh, in fact, I even made it more visible right up with with the theatrical release. Is those scenes that were added in to the TV cut were out of order, and so this guy Spice Saver, who's a fan, went and put them in the right order, and he made sure that they hit at the right moments to give the message that was needed. And the movie doesn't open with Irulan; it opens with Reverend Mother Bohama or Rohama, the Fremen's Reverend Mother, who passes away and gives her knowledge to Jessica. It opens with her explaining the politics of the Empire. And it wasn't a scene that was actually meant to go in the movie, but it was finished. It was a costume test and a screen test to see how the lighting would work. And so it's her sitting back on a couch and just talking, and 3 seconds of that appears in the theatrical trailer. But it was a few minutes of her explaining things to the Fremen about, why the white people hate us, why the Galactic Empire are the enemy colonizers because of this, and it goes into what Koam means, and a bunch of really cool stuff. It's like, oh, all right. So when you put that in the right context, instead of just appearing randomly in the middle of the movie, that works out pretty well, And that cut, the the extended cut talks about how the water of life is made, which basically you drown a sandworm and you get its bile as it dies, and you take that and you feed it to a Reverend Mother. You feed it to a Bene Gesserit and they become a Reverend Mother if they can transmute the poisonous bile into plain water and then gain vast psychic powers.
I think
Right?
the Villeneuve film might actually show that part of the Water of
It does
Life.
show it. It
Okay.
does, because it's 6 hours long. And the
Because it's
Sci-Fi
6 hours
Channel
long.
miniseries, right, is three 1.3 1.5 hour episodes, which roughly translates to 4.5 5 hours, right? They really get it done. They show you a lot of the cool stuff when you have that extended time to work with. So we're 15 minutes in. I'm going to show the trailer for the video for the folks at home. Just pretend you can hear it, so smile and nod. Alright, we're going to go here to the video room. Over here on camera 2 where we stay classy. Virginia Madsen.
A beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 10,191. In this time, the most precious substance in the universe is the spice melange. The spice extends life. The spice exists on only one planet in the entire universe. The planet is Arrakis, also known as Dune.
You are about to enter a world where the unexpected,
Many dangers exist on Arrakis.
the unknown,
An incredible secret has been kept on this planet.
and the unbelievable meet.
I see two great houses feuding.
Where kingdoms are built on earth that moves,
We have worm sign the likes of which even God has never seen.
and skies are filled with fire.
The prophecy which will cleanse the universe and bring us out of darkness.
Where a young warrior is called upon to free his people. A world that holds creation's greatest treasure.
He who controls the spice controls the universe.
And greatest terrors. A world where the mighty
This is genocide. The deliberate and systematic destruction of all life on Arrakis.
the mad,
I will kill him!
This thing always makes me laugh.
and the magical
That shot of the Baron
Yeah.
going around.
will have their final battle.
I'll talk about that after the trailer. It's a great shot.
Do not show the slightest pity or mercy.
Emperor, we come for you!
Dune, a spectacular journey through the wonders of space and the mysteries of time. From the boundaries of the incredible to the borders of the impossible. Now, Frank Herbert's widely read, talked about, and cherished masterpiece comes to the screen. Dino De Laurentiis presents Dune, a world beyond your experience, beyond your imagination.
Oh, such a good trailer. A 3-minute long trailer, right? You don't see 3-minute trailers anymore. You see 2-minute trailers until things get all the way to the end. And that's what they showed on TV to get you in. It was madness. Absolute madness. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. So, there was a 3-year production of pre-production and a little bit of post to get this movie to screen, and a lot of that was practical effects and sound. CG, where it existed, was the animations, and you did see some video effects to there, but they were video effects. They were, I'm taking a shot of this model, and then we're going to take a shot of this model on a screen next to the other screen, and that's going to be how we make things fly.
There's a couple of bad matting shots in
Really
the movie.
bad matting shots, yeah.
They jumped out because most of the movie looks great, but
Oh, it
there's a
does.
couple of bad matting shots.
So Lynch designed all the sets. He designed all the costumes. He picked all the lighting. He did everything to get this thing nailed down, and it really shows. And for the depth that he put into his other films, right? This is his first big budget film. This was a $40 million budget, and it made $30 million in the U.S. and Canada, and another $38 million worldwide. So it made its money back eventually. It now is an amazing piece of work. It stands up, as you mentioned earlier. But at the time, it wasn't huge, right? In the same year, or a year after, rather, Star Trek II came out, which had the same budget of $40 million and made a couple $100 million, which was giant money for the 80s. Right now it's a bomb, but then it's really big. And so Dune did okay, but Lynch never saw another penny from it. He got his money up front, and that was it, because the negative press and the way that they had decided to promote the movie, which is a darn shame, because he wanted to do more, right? There were more books. He wanted to do those books too. Everyone wants to do those books. Villeneuve wants to do those books. In fact, they've got Dune Part 3 on the schedule for next year. It's supposed to be filming this summer, which will be Dune Messiah. And I don't know if they're going to split that into 2 movies or not, or if he can get that book into, which it's a slightly smaller book than Dune is, Dune Messiah. So they might be able to get that into 3 hours. I don't know. But they certainly did for the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries version of it. But Lynch was happy to revisit that content, except for the part where, they weren't going to pay him. And they weren't going to let him make movies. They're going to do crazy shit. All right.
Yeah. So, so did you have a place you wanted to take this? Because one of the things I am fascinated by is why the movie was such a resounding critical failure. Because, I just sort of skimmed over the critical consensus, and the critical consensus was so bad, and it feels like not that many people have revisited it in a positive way either. People still don't. It's really common for people to not like this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you have a thought about that.
I love it.
Theories.
I loved it in the theater. I mean, I bought it on VHS. I bought it on Laserdisc. I still own the Laserdisc of it. I have a Steelbook edition here of the extended version, because it was the only thing you could get on DVD. I have an HD DVD version of this film. I have a Blu-ray version. I have a 4K version of this film. And no, I don't have a 4K. There's a 4K restoration on the Blu-ray, but it's only Blu-ray resolution. I think it's fantastic. Fans and critics all have different opinions of this, and boy, I don't.
Okay, so I have a theory.
I want to hear your theory. I mean, you asked my opinion of it, and I think people are just wrong.
I just asked if you had a theory about why. Because I think it is. I think that it does feel a little rushed. It shows the fact that it was kind of brutally cut, I think. And I think that's. But I think that's. That shouldn't put it down quite as far as the critical consensus was. But I think that they did a bunch of voiceovers in an attempt to smooth over the gaps in the storyline that were left by the fact that the cuts were so brutal. And I think the voiceovers aren't good.
Yeah.
And I think the reason the voiceovers aren't good is because it seems to me, I could be wrong about this, you seem to know a lot of stuff about sort of the background of how the movie was made, but the voiceovers feel to me very tacked on, a little bit like the voiceovers in Blade Runner, actually, which nobody likes those either. They feel tacked on they feel poorly considered. They're very repetitive, and they're frequently just basically restating. Even though they're there to supposedly to kind of explain things in a movie that would otherwise be incomprehensible, they don't actually explain anything. Most of the time, they're just kind of reiterating what we've already seen. Like there's a scene where Jessica and Paul are being menaced by a sandworm. Like the sandworm's face is like right there, and Paul says, "Spice, you smell it?" Like the worm's breathing on them, and they smell spice. And Jessica says, "Yes." And then they do a voiceover where he's like, "The worm's the spice. Is there a connection?" It's like you just said out loud. You don't need the head voice to do that. So I think that is actually the main negative aspect of the movie, and I think part of the problem is the point of those voiceovers was supposed to be to explain things, and this is David Lynch. Why would you ever go to David Lynch and say, "David, explain this"? It's ridiculous. He doesn't explain things. So of course the voiceovers don't explain anything. They just make it seem more confusing. Anyway, that's my theory.
That is an excellent theory, and Wikipedia agrees with you. It says here when they added the voiceover, it was specifically to explain things and to explain scenes that were cut out. That line is from the book. I mean, the spice, do you smell it? Just like later on when I don't think this made the theatrical cut, but it definitely made the extended Spice I've read. It's where they're eating food with the Fremen, and he says this spice and everything. It's just shock for him. Why, if this is so expensive in the outer universe, they're doing everything with it, right? It's everywhere. It's all around this planet. It's just everything. And nobody knows where the spice comes from. Or they just know that sometimes they find it on the ground, and so they go and send a robot out there with 27 guys in the robot to get all the spice they can, and then another robot to go pick them up before the worm comes and eats them. The exact nature of the great cycle of the maker to make the spice. For those who don't know, big spoilers, the spice is dead worms. It's the dust that you get when a worm decomposes. And so they talk all the time in the movie about the worms are protecting their own without actually saying, "You're going to my grave or my grandfather's grave. Leave. Don't go to my grandfather's grave. That'd be bad."
Are the sandworms intelligent? Like, are they revealed in later books to be intelligent? I haven't actually read any books other than the first one. So
they are animals, but they are emotional animals. They are able to recognize people, and they are able to recognize crazy things like psychic powers, right? So they have a respect for the Bene Gesserit. They certainly have a respect for Paul once he becomes a Reverend Father, I guess you could call it. Once he becomes the true Kwisatz Haderach, or rather, once he becomes the Prophet of Change. The Kwisatz Haderach is actually his son Leto II, which is from the second book, Dune Messiah. There's a cycle of things that makes a worm. And so there's an animal on Arrakis called a sand trout, which is basically a fish-like thing like this, which swims through the sand, swims through the dunes, and it eats the plants and moisture that lives under the ground. Over time, they'll get big enough that they tend to seek each other out, and when enough sand trout get together, they make a tiny baby worm. They just kind of fuse together like flounders or groupers in the ocean. And then once that worm starts eating spice, it gets big. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it becomes these giant worms that you see people riding on. And there are even larger ones, right? They talk about the worm that Paul calls up is nearly 1 kilometer long. And it's the biggest worm anyone's ever seen. But they know about worms like this because Stilgar calls it a grandfather worm. It's an ancient worm that's about to die and become a huge pile of spice somewhere in the desert. And the sand trout will carry that spice with them throughout the desert as they swim through the dunes. And that's the cycle of the maker. So, and once, the other thing that happens is once the worm dies and poofs into spice, it spawns a whole bunch of little sand trout, which then swim all around the planet and do things. And all of these life forms are allergic to water. And so the dream and the green prophecy that Liet Kynes wanted to make Dune into a world where people could live on, and it wasn't a huge, nasty desert planet, is that Dune, Arrakis once had greenery, and it once had flowing water, it once had all those things. But then the cycle of spice happened, and people kept wanting spice, and so they kept encouraging the worms to do what worms do, until eventually they took over the entire planet and locked all the water away. And billions of decaliters, as Paul says, of water exist, trapped and captured under the sand. But on the surface, there is no water, because the surface is where the sandworms live. And when you can take that water away, the sandworms get to do all their stuff. So that's the story of the sandworms.
Oh, so I was just going to say, so is there an endpoint of the Dune series? Like, do they release the water, start the cycle of water flowing again, and then no more spice?
They absolutely do.
Okay.
So, crazy things happen in the second book, which is why I'm really interested to see what will become of it in the Villeneuve copy. I know what happens in the book. It's one of my favorite books of all time, actually, is that second book, Dune Messiah, which was split into 2 books for paperback release called Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. And the Sci-Fi Channel version of it is simply called Children of Dune, but the actual book was called Dune Messiah. And that's, I think, what the movie will be called next year. Yeah, it might also just be called Dune Part 3. But in that book, it is revealed that Paul and Chani have a son, and she is part of the novel Dune, and that son does not appear in the David Lynch version. It does not appear in the Villeneuve version. It appears in the Sci-Fi Channel version. And the reason why that son is important is because the Beast Raban kills him. So there's a lot of reasons to hate Raban, but he killed Paul and Chani's kid, and that's why Chani is so angry and sad in the latter half of the movie, is because she is absolutely in grief for her lost family. Her father died, her mother died, her child died, and she doesn't know if she'll ever have another child because Paul is marrying Irulan and becoming the emperor of the known universe. So they have 2 more kids, and one of them is named Leto after Paul's father, Leto, and he is simply called Leto II. And Paul suffers an accident in the second book, and his eyes are burned out by something called a stone burner, which is essentially an unregulated nuclear reactor. And it burns out Paul's eyes, so he becomes blind. It doesn't stop him from seeing the past, the future, and the present all at the same time. He just can't see what color you're wearing. So he can see your memory of what he's doing in the future, in the present, but he can't actually see what he's doing. And his son, Leto, starts following Paul around as he's making his way through all of the sieges on Dune as a blind wandering prophet. And he's playing with the sand trout, and he just puts one on his hand, and it fuses to his hand. And so he peels it off and puts it back on, and peels it off and puts it back on. And eventually Leto covers himself in sand trout to make a still suit and starts swimming through the sand like a worm. And he outlives Paul, outlives Chani, outlives everyone, and eventually becomes a giant sandworm and also emperor of the known universe. And so it's Paul's son, Leto, who is the Kwisatz Haderach. And he is the one who starts restricting the zones where the sandworms can go to add greenery back to the surface of Arrakis. And when Leto dies at the end of God Emperor of Dune, which is a book I did not understand until I was a parent myself, so it's really hard for kids to get through that book. It really is. Because it's an adult book written by an adult. Frank Herbert knew how to write books a lot better in the late 70s than he did in the early 60s. And he wrote one humdinger of a book. It's my second favorite Dune book. After that book comes Heretics of Dune, which moves you forward, I think, a couple hundred years. And then eventually there's one called Chapter House Dune, which is a couple thousand years in the future, when Arrakis is a green and growing planet, and there's small zones at the poles where the sandworms are allowed to live. And they eventually pack up the sandworms on giant ships and go to leave the galaxy, the Bene Gesserit do, with the worms and the spice, so that they can do stuff without having to worry about everything else. So it's a huge, thousands of years cycle to get to the spot where there is a green Arrakis, but it is a promise that Paul makes and Paul keeps.
So what happens to the rest of the galaxy?
Oh, they're fucked.
Okay, yeah, because when one of the things that struck me in 1984, and actually struck me again when I watched it, when I rewatched it, is that it's actually a very good metaphor for our oil dependence.
Yep.
And it really works on that level, and it's interesting because I feel that metaphor's obviously there and was probably part of what Herbert was thinking about when he wrote Dune, but it doesn't come through as much in the Villeneuve version.
It does not.
I feel.
It does not. But they bring it up. I'm sorry, I just cut you off. Keep talking.
Oh, sorry. No. Actually, that was a transition because I want to talk about the deficiencies of the Villeneuve version, because I feel that it was largely praised, whereas David Lynch's version was largely, dissed by the critics, and I feel that, the David Lynch version has some notable flaws. The voiceover is the one that I mostly pick up on, but it also does some amazing things that the Villeneuve version does not do. So.
Yeah. Let's do one piece of small bookkeeping before we go to that, because I want to stay on this because it's our David Lynch Film Fest. And one of the things that we say we're going to talk about in the David Lynch Film Fest is our returning characters and actors. Remember that?
Oh, yes.
So, in Dune, we have 2 returning cast members. 3, actually. 3 recurring cast members. We have Freddie Jones, who played Thufir Hawat in Dune, but was also the evil circus man in The Elephant Man.
Mm.
Jack Nance, Eraserhead himself, was one of the Baron's chief attendants.
Okay, I noticed him.
Shock red orange hair. In fact, he's the one who is running the Baron's remote control in a couple scenes. So when the Baron is flying around a room, you see Jack Nance going like this on a little puppeteering rig. And in an uncredited appearance, David Lynch is in this movie. David Lynch.
He's a spice harvester.
He is a spice harvester. He is the guy on the radio talking to Duke Leto, and you cut in, you see him, and it's like, oh, and that's David Lynch, and David Lynch was in The Amputee, so he counts as a returning character. But it's the first time we see that, and we have new cast members here who will be returning. We have Kyle MacLachlan,
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I really like Kyle MacLachlan.
Who signed a 2-movie deal to do this because they were going to make Dune Messiah. Lynch was writing the script until it all bombed. And then that movie deal was still valid, though, which is why he picked up MacLachlan for Blue Velvet. Because he was already under contract and you could get him cheap. Plus, he liked him. Everett McGill, Stilgar, whom we see in Twin Peaks as Earl. Jack Nance again will be coming back. And Alicia Witt will come back in both Twin Peaks and David Lynch's Hotel Room. Which is... Freddie Jones will also be in that. But it's an anthology series that was on HBO for 3 episodes, 2 of which Lynch wrote. And I have already started the process of acquiring both Hotel Room and On the Air, which are David Lynch's other TV projects. So yeah, this is a big jumping off point for the Lynchiverse. One of the neat things about the Dune universe is that they have something called the Orange County Bible. And they are actually Catholics in the very far future. But it's a weird, fucked up version of Catholicism that comes down and handed to the Bene Gesserits. And that was one of the things that Lynch really laughed at, is that religion is lampooned in the book, but it's also preserved and brought forward throughout everything. So he made sure that religion and prophecy were both praised and lambasted in his version, which, in the Villeneuve version, are extremely reviled and not praised in any way. Jessica in that version is a monster. She's a horrible human, whereas in the Lynch version and the Sci-Fi Channel version, she's a bystander. And it's a really interesting change because the Jessica who's in the Villeneuve version is a lot closer to the Jessica who's in the book. They don't have an actual Alia in the Villeneuve version. There is simply a running conversation with her in the womb and Jessica. They don't skip forward in time as Paul grows to be a man and spends years and years learning how to fight and do things before he takes the water of life. It's just a couple months of him being in the desert before he takes the water of life in the Villeneuve version. And there's not nearly enough time for Raban to massacre everybody and commit genocide, which he was ordered to do in just those few months. So it borrows very heavily, as does the Sci-Fi Channel version, from the imagery of David Lynch's Dune. I think in part because Lynch was interpreting what he thought Herbert was saying, and he actually got to talk to Frank Herbert, whereas the people who did the Sci-Fi Channel version and Denis Villeneuve did not. They didn't have access to the font of wisdom and the source for how things should look or why things were done a certain way. So they had the next best thing, which was the text and Lynch's secondhand impressions all the way in. You mentioned that it is universally loved. Well, it's loved because it made money. And that's a huge deal for Warner Brothers. They offered Dune same-day streaming on HBO Max because it was in the middle of a pandemic. And I knew I could just watch it at home, so I didn't see it in the theater. But then I didn't watch it at home either. And I bought the Blu-ray and didn't watch the Blu-ray. And then I bought the 4K version of it because now I had a 4K TV and a 4K projector, and I didn't watch it. I watched it yesterday and this morning is when I watched the Villeneuve version. And I happen to agree with Julie. It is a fine movie. It is a very interesting movie. It doesn't hold up because it's 6 hours long, and it probably could have been 3 hours long. It could have made it.
I think so.
You know,
Yeah.
They didn't need the voiceover. They didn't need a lot of stuff. There's a lot of lingering shots. There's so much stuff on Gidi Prime, right? Which is important stuff. But I don't need to know that much about Faye Duatha because he's in the book.
It seems like they take
to get stabbed.
Yeah, it seems like they take way too long to get to Dune.
Yeah.
Was my impression too in the Villeneuve version.
Here's the thing for you.
It's like, the movie's called Dune. When are we gonna get to Dune? Ah!
You don't see a fucking worm
When are we
until
gonna-
the second movie.
Right?
You don't see a worm until the second movie. You see something which may have been a worm's mouth eating a spice harvester, but you don't see a worm. That's the most important part. It's on the cover of the book. It's in the trailer. But you don't see it until part 2 of the movie. Dune Part 2. And Dune Part 1 ends with the fight with Janus. Right? They just get to the siege. There's the fight with Janus, who's played admirably by Dr. Mamega himself. Baby. Who's in Star Trek Brave New Worlds. He's amazing for the 3 minutes he's on screen in Dune Part 1. In Dune Part 2, he's a flashback that Paul talks to all the time to teach himself about Arrakis, which is a really interesting thing. Because it's the first person Paul ever killed, and it's a really important moment in Paul's life that he had to kill somebody. Because the Bene Gesserit told him the whole time, animals kill, people don't. Whereas the Bene Gesserit make other people kill people for them. Who's the animal? Who's the monster? And that's where Jessica really is both elevated and destroyed in the Villeneuve, because she goes all in on being a monster to try and save Paul, but also to save herself and her unborn child. And in the compressed timetable of 6 months that this book takes place, instead of the 6 years it should, she doesn't have enough time to develop. So all of her actions are taken as evil. Pure, unconcentrated, self-serving evil, rather than self-preservation. Her relationship with Duncan Idaho is gone. 100% gone. In the Villeneuve version. It's just not there. There's happy, fun bits. I mean, Jason Momoa is a great character. Great actor. He does a lot of things. You got to see his face, which is the first time we've seen his face in a very long time. He never shaves. Because he doesn't have to. But, yeah, you get to see a really cool version of Duncan Idaho in this movie. For a bit. And then he's gone. He's dead.
I mean, it's a little bit more than you see in the David Lynch movie. That's actually one thing. Like, there is almost no Duncan Idaho in the David Lynch movie.
No, there's a lot more that was filmed. You know, it's in the other cuts.
Yeah.
But Richard Jordan was one of the biggest name actors in Hollywood at that time, and he's a footnote in that movie. Dean Stockwell is in that movie, right? Dean Stockwell. And he's another recurring character. We'll see Dean Stockwell again in some other things.
Yeah.
But
Both I was just going to say, both versions struggle to find anything to do with the princess.
Yeah.
That's a recurring problem.
I think Villeneuve's cut does more for Irulan than Lynch's cut. There is slightly more Irulan in the extended versions, the alternate cuts, I'll say. But Irulan is an actual character doing actual things, whereas Shaddam IV isn't. You've got Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken is the Emperor, and he's a doddering old man sitting on a couch going, why do people hate me? It might as well be a fucking episode of the Animaniacs, right? He's not the Emperor, he's just Christopher Walken in a bad dress. But Irulan and the rest of the Bene Gesserit have a hugely expanded role in the Villeneuve cut. And it's big, it's huge all the way through. There are parts of the Spice Diver edit where the Bene Gesserit that they send to Fade and Irulan are interchangeable. You can't tell them apart. In fact, I thought for a moment that Irulan was the one courting Fade in some of these other some of the Lynch footage, since they were dressed so similarly. But when you get an actress like Florence Pugh, You can't mistake Florence Pugh for anybody else. And her as Irulan, who spends the majority of her time sitting around talking into a microphone as she's recording the history of the universe. Or wearing a chainmail vest and a crazy tinfoil helmet. A literal tinfoil helmet, people. That's what it was. She just kind of shows up at the end and says, "We can fix this, can't we, Paul?" And Paul says, "Yeah, I guess we can." And then, boom, off to the races we go. But there's a... You talked earlier about what happens to the rest of the universe when the spice is cut off. That's how Dune Part 2, the Villeneuve part, ends. In the Lynch cut, the houses of the Landsraad capitulate. They give up. They say, okay, yeah, we really want our spice. We really want to have interplanetary trade. We really want that stuff. But at the end of the Villeneuve cut, they said, your brother just declared war on the universe. And he did. That's a thing that he did. And billions of people will die because of what Paul did. He said he didn't want to go south over and over again in the Villeneuve cut because of what would happen, which isn't really brought up in the Lynchian cut. The jihad isn't brought up because Lynch was saving it for the second movie. It's a major part of Dune Messiah is the jihad. As time goes forward and he and Chani have more children and he's doing everything he can to do that. So the Freemen are his army because there are millions and millions of Freemen hidden among the Sietches on Arrakis, and they control the spice, so they have interplanetary and intergalactic travel, and they can go to any planet they want to in the universe and beat the shit out of it, which they do. And when they cut off trade to those planets, they can't get backup. They can't get troops. So the first place he goes is Caladan, conquers Caladan, and then he conquers all the other planets of the Landsraad until eventually he is the undisputed emperor, and nobody wants to fuck with him because what are you going to do? You're going to try to kill Paul Atreides? He's just going to send 1 million people to kill you. That's his backup plan. Is if I can kill you myself, I'll just send 1 million people to kill you. How's that? How you like them apples? Which don't grow on Arrakis. So I think the Villeneuve version is half a story twice. There's only half of it was in it should have been in the first part, was in the first part, and only half of it was in the second part that should have been in the second part. Where Lynch made a concerted effort because he had to cut down his 3-hour movie to 2 hours with 4 hours worth of film plus reshoots. He made a real concerted effort to make one story. Right? We're going to make this story and the story's going to work. And I think that he did. Whereas Villeneuve, he's got Warner Brothers money. And he already had approval for a third movie, so he's like, yeah, we'll just save that shit for later. There's no Alia in the Villeneuve movie. I think I brought it up, but I'll bring it up again. There's no Alia because there's no time jump. There's not enough time for Gurney Halleck to even grow the beard that he's got. I mean, admittedly, that's Josh Brolin. He could probably grow that beard overnight. But Gurney Halleck, not Gurney Halleck. You know, there's not enough time for the smugglers to do all that stuff. There's not enough time for them to totally disrupt the spice the way that they disrupt the spice in both the Lynch version and in the book. Again, recognizably the same story from the same source material, and you'll see the same lines, the same beats, the same stuff in all 3 versions. But it's longer, it's louder, but at times it's so soft I can't hear them talk. Right? Because they edit those things for 5.1 and Dolby Sound now, whereas Lynch didn't have that. He had what was in the theater, and so he had to mix his sound with his audio to get that across. And so all the dialogue is crisp and clear and intelligible, and people talk at each other, and you don't have to ADR it because he made sure that the microphone was over their heads when he made that movie, and that's what modern filmmakers don't do. They get the shot, they get the look of the shot, and then later on they go and they loop the dialogue to make sure that they have the absolute perfect mix and everything works the right way. But you're making your movie 2 or 3 times, and it doubles the cost of your movie to have to do that. David Lynch did this on $40 million. $40 million. They spend more than that on Super Bowl ads now.
Of course, it was 1984.
It was 1984, $40 million. Right, which is like, I mean, that's $200 million now. But, no, it's like $120 million now. But there's $120 million movies that come out now that don't do that well. Ryan Coogler just made an $80 million movie make $150 million. And he's keeping most of that money. So it is possible to make the kind of movies you need to make to really be an author and to really get that stuff across. And don't get me wrong, Denis Villeneuve is an amazing filmmaker. He's incredible at what he does. Dune isn't there. It's not good enough. It's very pretty. It's very loud at some points. It's great. But, you know, I was playing a game on my iPad, which I keep here on my desk, throughout both halves of that movie.
Yeah, it's not... The thing that I noticed, I actually liked the choice to make Jessica kind of evil because I thought it was interesting. And in fact, I thought it was like the most interesting thing in the movie.
I thought it was interesting too, but it was weird.
But the thing that I noticed is that the David Lynch version has all of these like moments that have a huge like impact, right? Like the first, like when you see the navigator in that opening scene, there is nothing like that in the Villeneuve version. Like nowhere is there anything that gets you going, holy shit, what the hell is that? He gets a little bit of that sense of grandeur with the sandworms themselves. But I feel like the David Lynch movie has that kind of, holy shit, what? Going on throughout.
Yeah.
And that's what I missed. Like I missed, I just missed all those things that pop, all those things that are like stuck in my head, right? Like there's no moment like, it is by Will Alone, my thoughts acquire speed, blah, 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 you know,
oh, Brad Dourif.
the lips acquire stains, the stains become a warning. And it's like, that just played with my head so much. The stains become a warning. Warning of what? We never find out. And that's what makes it play with your head, I think. It's like, a warning of what? What's the warning? What are they warning us about?
Well, you're taking too many drugs.
Yeah, but it seemed more interesting than that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like in the like in the Lynch version, the Mentats have this kind of, you know, chaotic looking, you know, raspberry type stain. In the Villeneuve version, they have a neat little tattoo. Like it's a little, and it's like I feel like that's the aesthetically that's the difference. Is the David Lynch movie is like big and sprawling and messy and gorgeous, and you know it's got this steampunky Baroque decadence that cannot be denied, and every single shot in the movie pushes that theme, I think. And I think it's a favorite theme of David Lynch's, which is corruption.
Mm-hmm.
David, like if there's a repeating theme with David Lynch, he's always making movies about sort of like the fight between like corruption and purity, or corruption and innocence, and he had this. He gives you that sense of how corrupt and exploitive the Landsrat, you know, all that entire system. He makes you feel it. You know, especially with the Harkonnens, obviously. And like the Villeneuve version, like the Harkonnens are weird and creepy, but they're not like these grotesque monsters like they are in David Lynch. And
yeah,
I missed that.
Stellan Skarsgård is an amazing actor. Kenneth McMillan ate everything he could put in his mouth. right? And I don't mean because he's a big guy, because he wasn't. That was a giant fat suit for both of them. But what's that scenery? Give that to me.
Yeah.
This is your line in the script? No, that's mine now. There is so much. Zoom just asked me if I was playing music, because I make music sounds with my mouth. I am afraid of Baron Harkonnen in the Lynch version. I am not afraid of Baron Harkonnen in the Villeneuve version, because I'm afraid of Fade. And Fade is... Sting appears on screen twice before the end of the movie when he has to kill Paul. And one of the times he's naked and one of the times he's not. Right? So there's a bit, and it's in the book. It's not in any of the filmed versions where they talk about it. But that crazy suit that Fade wears, that's Paul's suit. That was a suit of armor made specifically for Paul by his father on Gurney's recommendation. So this is a combat suit here. You're graduated. You've learned all that we could teach you. Here are the cool things you can do with this suit. So it's got shields. It's got the hidden knives. It's got all these cool things because Paul knew how to use the Weirding Way. And that suit was designed to amplify the Weirding Way for him. Nope. Doesn't happen anywhere else. In the sci-fi version, they get naked and they fight. In the... or they're wearing diapers, right? But it's the same thing with the Jamis fight in the Sci-Fi Channel version, right? They bring out, which is actually in the books, it's like, look, we don't fight with still suits on. Those things are expensive. You fight naked. And then when your water dies, we take your water and we throw you in the vat and we're going to drink you later. But Paul's fighting in his still suit at the end of both the Lynch version and the Villeneuve version. And Fade is right there with his special cool battle suit, but is no longer Paul's suit. It's very clearly Fade's suit that Fade wears to kill slaves in the arena. Okay, that's weird. You know, there's a moment in the Villeneuve version where you can hear the Baron beating women to death off screen. And it is horrifying to see this. And Fade casually murders like 3 or 4 concubines just to prove that a knife isn't sharp enough. And so they die. Not only do they die, but they die badly. And then he kills the guy who brought him the knife, so the next guy can give him the right knife all the way through there, right? Fade is more of a monster than Raban, which is the intent of Herbert. Raban is a bumbling fool who happens to be the one that everyone is afraid of because he looks like the Baron, and everyone's really afraid of the Baron. But Fade Roth is the one you got to be afraid of. Wasn't afraid of Sting, but Sting was awesome. Dancing around, those little blue tights. I will kill him! Okay, sure. And then he dies, gets stabbed in the mouth, and then Paul just blows him up with his voice, which is something that doesn't really happen in the Villeneuve version. Paul's really good at using the voice, but it's a Bene Gesserit voice, not the Weirding Way. In fact, I don't think the Weirding Way comes up once in the Villeneuve version, ever.
Yeah, that was another. Yeah, that was another thing that I missed.
I mean, Jessica says after she defeats Stilgar, "This is the Weirding Way. I will teach it to you." And it's okay, you have worth. You have worth now, but it isn't all the things that it is because it's a sonic discipline that you can do when you have total control of things. And the House Atreides built machines to help their soldiers focus those things, but the Bene Gesserit could just do it as part of their combat, and Paul can just do it because, you know, he has
Bene Gesserit powers.
He has Bene Gesserit powers, and he has crazy mad powers. He's a Reverend Father. So all those things were missing. The crazy science of the science fiction was missing, and there's a lot more of the mysticism in it. You know, crazy cult leader Jessica with her tattoos all over the place, I like it. I like it a lot. You know, it's a lot better than just shaving her head like Francesca Annis had to do and not wearing makeup anymore. Which is a shame because she's a spectacularly beautiful woman. But the tattoos that Jessica ends up with in in the Villeneuve version, if you look at all the other Reverend Mothers and Bene Gesserit who are on Arrakis, none of them have that many tattoos. And I believe you get those for killing people.
I was gonna say she's the most crazy, so she has the most.
She is the most crazy. She's the most tattooed, but she does the most things, and she's the most important of all the folks that are around there. So yeah, she gets inked up all over the place. Not a lot of people have tattoos. Sean Young is an okay actress who's in movies for like 8 minutes. Zendaya is an amazing actress who's in movies for 3 hours. And she is the opening narration of the Villeneuve version, which I thought was a really weird change. It's Chani talking about the evil colonizers, and then she blows something up. So right off the bat, you know who Chani is, and then it's revealed that that's Paul's crazy dream of Chani. So he's seeing her being a terrorist, doing stuff. I don't know. There's so many bits and bobs that the Villeneuve version isn't gonna match up to for the Lynch version. Mind you, I've seen it dozens and dozens of times. I'm not exactly sure. It's way over 60, but I'm not exactly sure how many times I've seen Dune. I don't have a count like Star Wars where it's way over 200, but it's definitely over 60. I'm not sure I'm going back to the Villeneuve version until the next movie comes out. Unless there's a commentary track on there that I missed. Because if there is a commentary track, I'm damn well watching a commentary track for that. To see what Villeneuve thinks about his movie and how he made it.
I think that's part of the problem of it missing those little moments that hit so hard. Like when I was watching the David Lynch Dune last night, I fell asleep during the final battle and woke up and it's like, oh, I missed the bit where his crazy little sister kills the Baron. So I had to rewind to watch the bit where his crazy little sister kills the Baron. Because I wanted to see that moment. Because I love that moment. And I feel like the Villeneuve version doesn't have anything like that. It doesn't have anything where it's like, it's that one moment. And I feel like that's what keeps us going back to movies. Like when I think about the movies that I go back to again and again, it's because like, oh, there's that one scene I just love and want to see over and over and over again.
There are lines from Dune that I say every day when I'm talking to other people. Things like, Uso has called a big one. Again, it is the legend. When I say again, it is the legend, I'm talking about Dune. And how impactful that movie has been for me. And there are times when I'll go, and then I'll go, Shia Lud afterwards. And sometimes I'm with nerds like Julie here, and she'll get it. But other times, people just stare at me, Shy what? Huh? What? And I don't have time to explain Dune to you. Go figure it out. Watch this video. Learn why I am the way I am. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. But
learn the weirding way.
Learn the weirding way, yeah. My name is a killing word, right? That's Paul's absolute fear. It's like somebody said my name and they blew something up. There's only like 5 words that do that, and now my name is one of them. And it's the name I picked for myself, Muad'Dib. There's so many good things there. So many good things. I mean, Everett McGill too. His delivery of Stilgar is simply amazing. He's this crazed, haunting guy who's hanging around the backgrounds, and you see him not as a religious zealot, but he's a guy trying to get by the best he can. But he has the chops, right? He's ready to give them both back to the desert and say, I'll wait for you to die and then I'll steal your water. Javier Bardem is another Oscar-winning actor who's really good at movies when he's in movies a lot. And he's in that movie a lot. There is a lot of Stilgar. A whole lot of Stilgar. A whole lot of Stilgar. And there might be too much Stilgar. I'm not sure. There's certainly too much Timothée Chalamet. But in a movie where you're focusing on a 14-year-old who becomes 16, it's okay. But he doesn't become 16. he becomes 15. Right? There's maybe a half a year in there by the time they leave Caladan, by the time they get to the end of the movie, the Villeneuve version, because it's all just this compressed timeline. Now, hopefully we'll see expanded in the next version, right? It'll be, I mean, Chalamet is 26 years old. He just looks like he's 14. So they'll use harsher light on him, and they won't soften up his face as much for the sequels. And you'll probably see a kid running around, a toddler. You'll definitely see Alia. They're saving her for the next movie, for sure. Maybe Jessica will have even more tattoos.
Gang tattoos. Or prison tattoos.
Different tattoos. You know what I think I
Every
need
time I
today?
kill the man, I got a tattoo. What?
Down my nose. Why? Because I'm Jessica.
Okay, so final weird theory. Would the Eraserhead baby, if it had grown up,
I think it did become a
navigator?
Navigator.
Okay.
I think it did.
Excellent.
I think it absolutely
That's what
did.
I think, too.
That's why they looked the way they did. Right? And if, you know, that little bag that he gets, I bet that was the spice. And if he just fed the spice to the kid would have gone through the universe. Everything would have been fine. Everything would be okay in heaven. But it'd be really okay when this crazy baby that your girlfriend gave birth to, and all the other crazy soundtrack that she gave birth to, if they just give him a little spice, they'll be fine. You were talking about the mad Art Deco aesthetics. So, as I said, he designed the storyboards and he built those things out and he did crazy stuff. There was a guy on set whose whole job was to crank a wheel like this to move the Baron around the room. That was a practical rig he was on. And there was a big crane arm that went up out of the frame that you didn't get to see because the way he shot it. There were the wires there. And there was a guy whose job was to crank him back and forth and crank him into the camera and out of the camera. And it had all these levers and pedals on, and David Lynch designed it things like, this is the way we got to do this. We got to make sure that nobody can see it, but we got to do it right.
That's pretty good, David Lynch.
Yeah, I've been listening to him a lot. Oh yeah. Okay. More about the Lynch version. It is dark. And when I mean dark, I mean it is dimly lit. There's a lot of night for day shots. There's a lot of interiors. They filmed this in Mexico, and in an environment where they had 40 still suits, I think, and they had to keep swapping the actors in and out of them because they would die if they stayed outside in Mexico the whole time. And but Brian McMillan, or the Baron, he would lose 5 pounds a day wearing that fat suit, and he was inside. It was just so hot down there when they were filming the movie. But to do all these things and to get all those people up there were, I think, 400 or 500 people on set. Production crew getting all this stuff squared away, and I don't know how many thousands there were on the Villeneuve movies, but there was a strike in the middle of it. So I'm not really sure if any of them are getting credited or have their contributions recognized the same way. I know when I was working at Warner Brothers, the movies were a huge deal, but they didn't talk about the money ever. They would just say, it's coming out on these days, it's coming out on these days, it's coming out on these days. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. But I don't think they were all that happy with how much money was being spent on Dune for the kind of return that they were expecting to get from that catalog and the rights that they owned. Whereas David Lynch could just go talk to Frank Herbert, and if something didn't work right, he'd change it. The shooting script was the 7th draft of the script, and they went to Mexico with the 6th draft of the script. So they were starting to shoot And then he was doing rewrites right up until the time when principal photography started. But once they started, there was never a blue page in that script. It was the script, and you went with that and got all the way in there. Now they went back and they did reshoots afterwards to produce when they had to cut down. So they cut from 3 hours to just under 2 or just over 2, 127 minutes I think I said. And the voiceover was added. Some scenes were cut, some scenes were moved around, all those kind of bits. But the singular vision of an eerie outer place with bright, vibrant colors against an absolutely dark in frame background, that was very David Lynch. And it's what we saw in Eraserhead. It's what we saw in Elephant Man. And certainly saw it in The Grandmother, where I'm pulling in and out of the camera, or I'm pushing in rather on the darkness so that the light really pops. And even in the shot that's behind us here, right? You see David Lynch before you see Julie or I, because of where he's centered on the screen, because he is surrounded by darkness that makes him all that more important. The Villeneuve version is sometimes so brightly lit that everything is white. Giddy Prime, for example, I guess, has a really strong main series star and not enough nitrogen in the atmosphere, because our sun is white, and whatever star is orbiting Giddy Prime is putting out a lot of visible white light radiation, because that's all you see when the sun is shining. But 8 feet away from those windows, everything is dark and beautiful and bright. It's kooky. And I don't think the visuals are there. Even the night stuff that's in the Villeneuve films, I think Caladan works better than any place else out there because it was the most natural looking. It was the most Earth-like. And that's the metaphor, right? We're going from Earth to the strange place. We're traveling from Caladan to Arrakis. So unless you happen to live in Mexico or Tunisia, you don't see things like Arrakis anywhere. You see Caladan everywhere. You see oceans everywhere. You see trees everywhere. You know what rain is. You're a human being, right? Unless you live in the Kalahari where it rains once every year. You know what rain is, and so you can relate to the people who live on Caladan. You can't live with the people who live on Ix, which is the machine planet. You can't live on Giddy Prime. Which is another machine planet, but you're talking about the oil metaphor. Giddy Prime actually has oil. That's what they do. They export it. And so they have the other kinds of fuel in the universe that aren't spice, is what comes from Giddy Prime. So that when they got the spice contract, they became bajillion trillionaires. And they had a monopoly on power, literal power, not informed political power. And I think the other planets and what's going on and all those things in the Villeneuve versions adds depth and strength to the universe, which was entirely unnecessary to the David Lynch film, because it's about Arrakis Dune, desert planet. It takes place on Arrakis Dune, desert planet. You don't have to go anywhere else. It's right there. And that's what I got to say about that. It's pretty. It sounds great. It had an amazing score by the guy, one of the members of Toto, and it...
That's right, Toto. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. Music by Toto. And that soundtrack is so iconic. It's one of the temp scores for Hollywood. Hilariously, Mars Bringer of War was the temp score that they used for Dune. So that when they had to do trailers or screeners or whatnot, they didn't have all the music ready, they would play Holst the Planet's Mars Bringer of War.
That seems appropriate.
Yeah, it does. I could talk more about that movie. Again, it is the legend. But that's Dune. And it is my second favorite of all the David Lynch movies. But it's the one I've seen the most often.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm hard pressed to say what my favorite David Lynch movie is.
I'll say what
Maybe
mine
when we
is.
get to the end of this,
Yeah.
I will know.
I'll tell you right now, it's Mulholland
revisited
Drive.
them all.
A movie I've only seen once, but it is far and away my favorite David Lynch movie. And I love
choice.
Eraserhead a lot. I think it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I love The Elephant Man a lot. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. When we get to Mulholland Drive, I'm going to be apoplectic. Because I've been waiting to see that movie again for almost 20 years.
Okay. Okay.
But next up, Blue Velvet. We're not going to talk about it tonight, but it is 1986. So it is just a couple years after Dune. In fact, he started making it right after Dune Messiah was canceled. So he had his time done up, and then he doing that. And the budget for Blue Velvet, not the same as the budget for Dune. Not the same at all. So we'll be talking a bit more about that later on. Julie, final thoughts about Dune and our discography so far.
Final thoughts. It's a wildly underrated movie. Watch it.
Yeah. If you're watching this video and have not seen Dune, sorry, but not. You knew coming in that we were going to be talking about this movie, and it is simply amazing. And if you have seen it, go back and watch the theatrical cut again. It may have been a few years. I know it was for me, since I'd seen the theatrical cut again. But search out that Spice Cipher fan edit. You can find it online for free. And it's because it is a fan edit, right? It's not a for sale product. It's just released into the universe using existing footage that's out there. It's not owned by anyone. In fact, there's a trailer for it. The fan edit has a trailer that says specifically, I don't have permission to do any of this stuff. I don't own anything. I made the best movie I know how to make using 2 movies that were cut all to shit. And I think at just over 3 hours, it is a superior cut of the film, but it's not as good as the one that Lynch had complete creative control over. So even though it's an abbreviated movie, it's a better movie because David Lynch did it. He said it. That's my director's cut. It's the one I did, the one I cut. And now, as late as last year, on the during an interview for the Criterion release of Inland Empire, he said that he had an interest in going back and revisiting Dune. And we never get to see it. I'm choking up. You can't see it now in my face. But he wanted to go back and make this right. And I want the better timeline where Julie and I can talk about next week Dune Revisited. Where
Dune, the return.
Dune the return, yes. Dune the return, where David Lynch they'll smoke cigarettes with us and tell us all about the things he couldn't say before and the things, because at the end of his life he didn't give any fucks. So he didn't have to worry about where his money came from or if anybody would hire him. He knew people would hire him. And so, but in 1984, boy, this was his second movie. His second big budget movie. And he wanted his third big budget movie, which got canceled. Right? He didn't have another studio movie until Fire Walk with Me. And I think that was his last studio movie. Everything else was independent film. Oh, no. The Long Ride. That's a studio movie. And we'll certainly talk about that one when the time comes. Straight Story, rather. That's what it's called. The Straight Story. 1999 is The Straight Story.
I was going to say, I don't think it's called The Long Ride. I know what
in my brain, it's always The Long Ride. But it's called The Straight Story because it's the protagonist's last name was Straight. Go figure. A little on the nose. All right. Well, McJulie, where can people find you online?
Gothouse.org. It's a good place to start. And I'm also McJulie on most social media. Probably the one I spend the most time on is Blue Sky right now. But you can find me on there.
All right. You can find me at scottjamesmagner.com. You can find me here on YouTube in the SJ Magner channel, which you're watching now, so I know not all that surprising. But I also stream video games, and I'm going to be doing interviews at some point and other stuff that we're going on. So here's the deal, is actually about exploring my media collection, not just David Lynch films. We're just starting with David Lynch films because they're really, really important, and we're really, really pissed off that we can't talk to David Lynch about them. So next up, I won't say next week because that probably won't happen. We're a lazy podcast. But we'll be talking about Blue Velvet. And, no, we're talking about Blue Velvet. In between Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, though, is The Cowboy and the Frenchman, which is a short film done for... it's a 26-minute film made for TV, and I don't know if we're going to cover it later on in the discography, but it's important to note that David Lynch is working all the time. And we're just talking about the tent poles that are coming up here, but he was always working. He was doing concert films, he was doing commercials, he was doing crazy weird stuff, and painting. So if you're a fan of David Lynch, fan of what we've been talking about, seek out documentaries and interviews with David Lynch, and it's the best way to figure out who he was and what he thought about stuff, because it's really worth your time. All right, and that's all I've got to say. Good night, everyone.
Right. Good night.